A 7-year-old girl walked into the police station alone and whispered to the desk sergeant. "He's still under the bed." What the officers who rushed to her house found horrified everyone. Now let's begin this journey together. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Chapter 1: The Whisper That Broke the Silence. The air in the precinct lobby was thick with the usual smells of stale coffee, industrial cleaner, and the faint metallic tang of human anxiety. It was a Tuesday afternoon, a river of mundane complaints and minor disputes flowing steadily toward the worn linoleum counter. Officer David Miller sat behind that counter, his gaze distant, his posture a study in practiced indifference. He was a good cop, a man who had once believed he could make a difference, but 20 years of seeing the same stories play out with different faces had sanded the sharp edges off his idealism, leaving behind a smooth, hard surface of routine. He processed paperwork, answered phones, and offered the same calming, non-committal phrases he had offered thousands of times before. His world was a predictable loop of procedure and paperwork. Then the loop broke. The automatic glass doors slid open with a soft hiss, but no one of an expected size walked through. For a moment Miller thought the sensor had malfunctioned. He glanced up from his report, his eyes scanning the empty threshold, and then he looked down. Standing just inside the doorway, so small she was almost lost in the cavernous space, was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 7. She wore a faded pink t-shirt with a cartoon unicorn on it and purple leggings, one knee smudged with dirt. In her tightly clenched fist, she held a small worn teddy bear with one button eye, its stitched smile seeming to sag with a shared weight of sorrow. Her own face was pale, her large dark eyes wide with a terror that was anything but childish. It was an old fear, a fear that had been lived with for a long time. She stood frozen, a tiny ship adrift in a vast, indifferent ocean. People walked past her, their minds on their own urgent errands, their own dramas. No one seemed to notice the small, silent figure radiating a silent scream. But Miller noticed. Something in his chest, a place he thought had long gone dormant, gave a sharp, painful lurch. He pushed his chair back, the sound scraping loudly in the quiet moment he now inhabited. All the background noise of the precinct faded into a dull hum. There was only the girl. He came around the counter, a slow and deliberate movement designed not to startle a frightened animal. He knelt down, bringing himself to her level, wincing slightly as his knee protested. He kept his voice low and soft, a tone he hadn't used since his own daughter was small. "Hey there," he said gently. "Are you lost, sweetheart?" The little girl flinched, her knuckles whitening around the teddy bear. She didn't speak. She just stared at him, her chest rising and falling in shallow, rapid breaths. He could see the pulse beating frantically in the delicate skin of her throat. This was not a lost child. This was a child who had run from something. In Miller's mind he thought, "Easy, Dave. Don't push her." He tried again. "My name is David. I'm a police officer. It's my job to help people. Can you tell me your name?" Her lips trembled. A single perfect tear escaped one eye and traced a clean path through the grime on her cheek. She took a tiny, hesitant step forward, then another. When she was close enough that he could feel the warmth of her small body, she finally spoke. Her voice was barely audible, a dry, rustling whisper, as if it had been scraped raw from disuse or from screaming. "Lily," she breathed. "Lily," Miller repeated, the name feeling sacred on his tongue. "That's a beautiful name. It's very nice to meet you, Lily. Can you tell me where your mommy or daddy is?" This was the question that broke the dam. Her face crumpled, the carefully held composure shattering into a million pieces. The fear in her eyes intensified, becoming a raw, visceral panic. She leaned in closer, her small hand reaching out and grabbing the fabric of his uniform sleeve, her grip surprisingly strong. Her whisper was urgent, desperate, filled with a secret she could no longer bear to hold. "He's still under the bed." The words hung in the air between them, nonsensical and terrifying. "He's still under the bed." It wasn't the kind of thing a child said. Not like this. Not with this kind of primal dread. The monster under the bed was supposed to be a metaphor, a nighttime fantasy. But the fear on Lily's face was not fantasy. It was reportage. She was stating a fact. A cold dread, sharp and unfamiliar, pierced through Miller's professional calm. Every instinct he had honed over 2 decades on the force screamed at him that this was real. This was happening right now. He placed his large hand gently over hers, his voice losing its softness and taking on a new edge of command. "Lily, who is under the bed? Is it your daddy?" She shook her head violently, her dark hair flying. "No," she whispered, the single word catching in her throat like a sob. "It's Mark." "Mark? Who is Mark?" Miller asked, his mind already racing, piecing together a grim puzzle. "Mommy's friend," she said. Her eyes pleaded with him, begging him to understand the weight of what she was saying, the courage it had taken to say it. "He plays the quiet game. He told me he'd leave if I was good, if I was quiet, but he's always there. Hiding. He's still under the bed." Miller's blood ran cold. The quiet game. Hiding. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. This wasn't a game. This was something else entirely. Something dark and predatory. He didn't need to hear another word. He squeezed her hand gently. "You did a very good thing coming here, Lily. You are the bravest girl I have ever met. Can you tell me where you live?" She gave him the address, the numbers and street name recited like a mantra she had practiced over and over on her long walk to the station. It was 6 blocks away. 6 blocks this tiny, terrified child had walked alone, carrying a secret that would have crushed most adults. Miller stood up, scooping her and her teddy bear into his arms. She buried her face in his neck, her small body trembling like a leaf in a storm. He turned and strode back toward the dispatch desk, his face a mask of grim determination. He barked orders, his voice cracking with an urgency that silenced the entire lobby. "Get me 2 units at 412 Maple Street now. Possible home invasion, possible kidnapping. Suspect is a male named Mark. Tell units to approach silent. The subject may be concealed inside the residence. There's a child involved." He didn't wait for a response. He carried Lily through the precinct, past the stunned faces of his colleagues, and out into the harsh afternoon sun. He wasn't going to wait for the patrol cars. He was going himself. As he buckled her into the passenger seat of his own cruiser, he looked at her small tear-streaked face. In her eyes he saw not just fear, but a flicker of hope. A hope she had placed entirely in him. In that moment, Officer David Miller felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. He felt the weight of a single precious life in his hands, and he swore to himself and to the little girl beside him that he would not let her down. The routine was over. This was real, and it was just beginning. Chapter 2: The House on Maple Street. The drive to 412 Maple Street was a blur of controlled urgency. Miller didn't use his sirens, not wanting to alert whoever was inside the house. He drove with a focused intensity, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Beside him, Lily was silent, her small hand clutching her teddy bear, Barnaby, as if it were a life raft. She stared out the window, her expression unreadable. Miller glanced at her, his heart aching. What had this child seen? What had she endured in the silence of her own home? Maple Street was deceptively peaceful. It was a street of modest, well-kept houses with green lawns and colorful flower beds. Children's bicycles lay discarded on sidewalks, and the afternoon sun cast long, lazy shadows across the pavement. It was the picture of suburban tranquility, a place where monsters were not supposed to exist. But Miller knew better. Monsters were masters of camouflage. They thrived in places where no one was looking for them. He pulled his cruiser to a stop a few houses down from 412, parking behind a large oak tree. 2 other patrol cars slid quietly into place behind him. He looked at the house. It was a small blue bungalow with white trim and a cheerful-looking porch swing. Pink petunias overflowed from a window box. It looked like any other house on the street. It looked normal. It looked safe. And that, Miller knew, was the most dangerous illusion of all. He turned to Lily, his voice low and steady. "Lily, I need you to be my brave little helper right now, okay? I need you to stay right here in the car with this officer. He's going to keep you safe. No matter what you hear, you stay with him. Can you do that for me?" She looked from him to the other officer, a young, kind-faced cop named Evans, who was now opening her door. She nodded, a small jerky movement. She didn't want him to go. He could see it in the way her fingers tightened on Barnaby the bear. But she didn't cry. She had spent all her tears. Now all that was left was a fragile, steely resolve. "You're going to get him, right?" she whispered, her voice full of a desperate hope. Miller looked into her eyes and made a promise. "Yes, Lily," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm going to get him." He got out of the car and conferred briefly with the other officers. The plan was simple. 2 officers would cover the back, while he and his partner, a stern, capable woman named Officer Chun, would approach the front. He felt a familiar surge of adrenaline, but this time it was different. It wasn't just about procedure and safety. It was personal. He had the image of Lily's terrified face burned into his mind. As they approached the house, the front door opened. A woman stood there, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She was young, with tired eyes and the same dark hair as Lily. She looked at the approaching officers with a mixture of confusion and annoyance. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice wary. "Ma'am, are you Sarah Connor?" Miller asked, keeping his tone even. "Yes," she said, her eyes narrowing. "What is this about?" In her mind, she was running through a list of possibilities. An unpaid parking ticket, a complaint from a neighbor about their dog. The truth was not even in the realm of her imagination. "Ma'am, we're here because your daughter Lily came to the police station," Miller said carefully, watching her reaction. Sarah's face hardened. A flash of anger, tinged with embarrassment, crossed her features. "Oh, for heaven's sake," she sighed, shaking her head. "I am so sorry. She has such a wild imagination. She's been telling the most ridiculous stories lately. I turn my back for 1 second and she wanders off. I'll talk to her. I'm really sorry to have wasted your time." She moved to close the door, to dismiss them and the inconvenience they represented. Miller put his hand up, stopping the door. "Ma'am, we don't believe this is a waste of time," he said, his voice firm but not aggressive. "Lily told us there is a man in your house. A man named Mark." Sarah's posture stiffened. Her defensiveness intensified. "Mark? My boyfriend? Of course he's here. He lives here. What on earth did she tell you?" Before Miller could answer, a man appeared behind Sarah, placing his hands on her shoulders. He was handsome in a rugged, unassuming way, with kind eyes and a warm, friendly smile. He looked exactly like the kind of man a single mother would trust. He looked safe. He was the picture of paternal concern. "Is everything all right, honey?" he asked, his voice a deep, reassuring rumble. He looked at the officers with an expression of mild confusion. "Officers? Is there a problem?" This was Mark. "Sir, we're here to investigate a report made by a 7-year-old child," Chun said, her voice flat and professional. Mark chuckled, a warm grandfatherly sound. He squeezed Sarah's shoulders affectionately. "Oh, you must mean Lily," he said, his smile widening. "She's a wonderful girl, but her imagination is working overtime these days. We were playing a game just a little while ago. Hide and seek. I think she might have gotten a little carried away." He looked at Miller, his eyes crinkling with feigned camaraderie. "You know how kids are." Miller felt a wave of revulsion. The man's charm was like a thick, cloying smoke, designed to obscure and confuse. He was smooth. He was practiced. He was trying to frame Lily's terror as a childish fantasy, a silly game. "In my mind, I see him for what he is," Miller thought. "A wolf." "We understand, sir," Miller said, his voice dangerously calm. "But we'll still need to come inside and have a look around just to be sure. It's standard procedure." Mark's smile didn't falter, but a flicker of something cold and hard passed through his eyes. It was there for only a second, but Miller saw it. "Is that really necessary?" Mark asked, his tone still light. "Sarah and I were just about to have dinner. I can assure you there's no monster under the bed. It was just a game." He emphasized the words monster under the bed, turning Lily's desperate plea into a joke. He was mocking her. He was mocking them. He was confident, arrogant, certain of his control over the situation. Sarah, caught between the reassuring presence of her boyfriend and the intimidating authority of the police, looked flustered. "Officers, really?" she began. "This is all a huge misunderstanding. Lily is a very sensitive child. She's been having nightmares." But Miller wasn't listening to her anymore. He was looking past her into the house. He was looking at the hallway that led to the bedrooms. He was looking at the closed door at the end of that hall. Lily's room. He could feel it, a cold spot in the warm, peaceful house. The truth was in that room. "Ma'am, with all due respect, we are coming inside," Miller said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "You can let us in, or we can come back with a warrant. Either way, we are not leaving until we have searched this house." The confrontation hung in the air, a silent battle of wills on the cheerful front porch. Sarah looked at Mark, seeking reassurance, but for the first time, his smile seemed strained. The mask was beginning to slip. He was a man who was used to being believed, to having his charm pave his way. He was not used to being challenged. Finally, with a sigh of put-upon resignation, Mark stepped back, pulling Sarah with him. All right, he said, raising his hands in a gesture of surrender. "If you must. Come on in. Search the whole house. You'll see. It's all just a little girl's fantasy." As Miller and Chan stepped across the threshold, the smell of freshly baked cookies hit them. The house was clean, cozy, filled with the trappings of a happy family life. Photos of a smiling Sarah and a beaming Lily adorned the walls. But Miller wasn't fooled by the domestic scenery. He knew that the most terrible things often happened in the most ordinary places. He walked down the hallway, his hand resting on the grip of his service weapon. He was walking toward Lily's room. He was walking toward the truth. And he had a sickening feeling that the truth was going to be far worse than any monster a child could ever imagine. Chapter 3: A Mother's Awakening. The air in the narrow hallway felt heavy, charged with unspoken secrets. Miller moved with a slow, deliberate pace, his senses on high alert. Chan was right behind him, her presence a silent promise of backup. Behind them, in the living room, Mark's charming facade was cracking under the pressure. He was trying to make small talk with the other officers, his voice a little too loud, his laughter a little too forced. Sarah stood beside him, wringing her hands, her face a canvas of confusion, anger, and a dawning terrible fear. She wanted to believe Mark. She wanted this to be a misunderstanding. But the grim determination on Officer Miller's face told a different story. Miller stopped in front of a white door with a colorful hand-painted sign that read Lily's Room, in bubbly letters, surrounded by stickers of stars and smiling animals. It was a door that should have led to a place of safety and dreams. Miller reached out and turned the knob. The room was a child's sanctuary. A canopy bed with a pink princess duvet. A shelf overflowing with stuffed animals. A small desk with crayons and drawing paper. But there was a chill in the air that had nothing to do with the temperature. It was the feeling of a space that had been violated. Miller's eyes went immediately to the bed. It was neatly made, a stark contrast to the rest of the room's gentle chaos. He knelt down, his heart pounding in his chest. He lifted the corner of the duvet, and he saw it. The space under the bed was not empty. There was a depression in the thick carpet, a perfectly flattened area, as if someone had been lying there for a very long time. Next to it was a small empty water bottle and a plastic wrapper from a granola bar. And something else. A small black object. Miller reached under the bed and picked it up. It was a police scanner, small and sophisticated, its power light blinking faintly. He stood up, the scanner cold and heavy in his palm. This was not part of a game. This was a hideout. A listening post. This was evidence of a man who was not just playing hide and seek, but hiding from the law. He turned and walked back into the living room, holding the scanner out for everyone to see. "Is this part of the game too, Mr. Mark?" Miller asked, his voice dripping with ice. Mark's face went white. The charming smile vanished, replaced by a snarl of pure venom. The mask was gone. The wolf was revealed. "I don't know what that is," he spat, his eyes darting toward the door. "That girl is a liar. She's always making things up." But Sarah wasn't looking at Mark anymore. She was staring at the scanner, her mind struggling to process the horrifying implication. The late-night whispers she had dismissed as nightmares. Lily's sudden refusal to sleep in her own bed. Her quiet, withdrawn behavior. It all coalesced into a single unbearable truth. She had been blind. She had been manipulated. She had let a monster into her daughter's life, into her daughter's room. Sarah, honey, don't listen to them, Mark pleaded, his voice now desperate. It's me. You know me. Sarah turned to him, her eyes filled with a dawning horror and a grief so profound it seemed to steal the air from her lungs. Who are you? She whispered, the question a ragged tear in the fabric of her reality. Miller knew this was the moment. He needed to separate her from him. Officer Chun, stay with the suspect, he ordered. He turned to Sarah, his voice gentle again. Ma'am, I need you to come with me. We need to go get Lily. The mention of her daughter's name seemed to break the spell. A new strength forged in guilt and fierce maternal love surged through Sarah. She nodded, her body trembling, but her eyes were clear now. The denial was gone, burned away by the terrible truth. They walked out of the house, leaving Mark standing in the living room. A cornered animal, his charm useless, his true nature exposed. As they stepped onto the porch, they saw her. An elderly woman from the house next door was standing by her fence, her face etched with concern. She was holding a pair of pruning shears. Is everything all right, dear? She asked Sarah, her sharp eyes flicking from Sarah's pale face to Officer Miller. I saw the police cars. I was worried. It's all right, Mr. Gable, Sarah stammered, not knowing what to say. The woman, Mrs. Gable, shook her head, her lips pursed in a thin line. I never liked him, she said, her voice firm. I told you, Sarah. A man with no past. Always watching. I saw him from my window. Saw him watching the children in the schoolyard across the street. A man like that. He has secrets. She was the wise elder, the one who had seen what others had refused to see. Miller nodded at her, a silent acknowledgement of her perception. Ma'am, you may have been right, he said. He then guided Sarah toward his car, where Lily was waiting. The reunion was heartbreaking. The moment Lily saw her mother, her face free of Mark's oppressive presence, she launched herself out of the car and into Sarah's arms. Sarah fell to her knees on the sidewalk, wrapping her daughter in a desperate embrace, her body racked with sobs. Oh, my baby, she cried, her voice muffled in Lily's hair. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. Mommy didn't know. Lily clung to her, her small arms wrapped tightly around her mother's neck. But she wasn't crying anymore. She looked over her mother's shoulder at Officer Miller, her eyes filled with a solemn understanding. She had done it. She had brought the truth into the light. Miller gave them a moment, his own throat tight with emotion. This was the turning point, the awakening, the formation of the alliance that would see them through the darkness to come. It was no longer just a police investigation. It was a rescue mission. He squatted down beside them, placing a hand on Sarah's shaking shoulder. We have to talk, he said softly. I need you to tell me everything. And I need Lily to be brave for a little while longer. I need her to tell us about the quiet game. Sarah pulled back, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. Her face was transformed. The confusion was gone, replaced by a fierce protective fire. She looked at Miller, her gaze unwavering. We'll tell you everything, she said, her voice raw but strong. He's not going to get away with this. We won't let him. In that moment, a team was forged on a sun-drenched suburban sidewalk. A jaded cop, a heartbroken mother, and a 7-year-old girl with the courage of a lion. They were united by a single purpose: to make sure the monster who had lived in the shadows of their lives would never hurt anyone again. The real fight had just begun, but now they were ready. They had each other. And they had the truth. Back at the station, they sat in a small, quiet interview room, a world away from the noise and chaos of the main precinct. Miller had insisted on it, creating a space that felt as safe as possible. He had brought them cups of water and a plate of the cookies that had been intended for Mark. Lily sat on her mother's lap, her teddy bear, Barnaby, held tight against her chest. She was still quiet, but the terror in her eyes had been replaced by a weary sort of calm. She was with her mother. She was with Officer Miller. She was safe. Lily, Miller began, his voice soft, you were so brave today. What you did. It took more courage than most grown-ups have. But I need to ask you some more questions. Is that okay? Lily looked at her mother. Sarah kissed the top of her head. It's okay, sweetheart, Sarah whispered. You can tell him. You don't have to keep any more secrets. The quiet game is over, your voice matters. That phrase, your voice matters, seemed to unlock something in Lily. She took a deep breath and began to speak. Her voice was small, but it was clear. She didn't use adult words for the things that had happened. She used the language of a child, which was somehow even more horrifying. Mark said it was a game, she began, her eyes focused on her bear. A special secret game just for us. He said if I told anyone, especially Mommy, something bad would happen. He said a bad man would come and take Mommy away because she wasn't good at keeping secrets. The manipulation was insidious, twisting a child's love for her mother into a tool of coercion. Sarah let out a choked sob, holding Lily tighter. Miller's jaw clenched. He kept his expression neutral, but inside a cold rage was building. He called it the monster under the bed game, Lily continued. He would hide there, sometimes all day. He had a special phone that talked like policemen. He said he was hiding from other monsters. He said I was his special lookout. My job was to be quiet. So quiet. If I made noise, the other monsters would find him. And then they would find us. She had been made a sentry, a guardian for her own tormentor. He had turned her bedroom into his fortress and her silence into its walls. Did he ever hurt you, Lily? Miller asked, the words tasting like poison in his mouth. Lily fell silent for a long moment. She fiddled with the button eye on her bear. He said it wouldn't hurt, she whispered, so quietly Miller had to lean in to hear. He said they were just yucky feelings. Like when you eat too much candy. He said the yucky feelings were secrets, and if I let them out they would turn into real monsters. He said the secrets kept Mommy safe. Sarah's control finally broke. A raw guttural wail of grief and guilt escaped her lips. She buried her face in her daughter's hair, her body shaking with uncontrollable sobs. Miller stood up and walked to the other side of the room, giving her a moment, his own emotions a roiling storm beneath his calm exterior. The yucky feelings, the perversion of a child's trust, the sheer, calculated cruelty of it all was staggering. He now understood the full weight of Lily's journey to the police station. She hadn't just been running from a man under her bed. She had been running from the yucky feelings. She had been running from the weight of the secrets she was forced to carry. She had defied the monsters to save her mother, the very person Mark had used as a threat. The alliance was solidified in that sterile room, cemented by tears and a child's whispered testimony. It was no longer just about arresting a man. It was about dismantling a web of lies that had been spun around a little girl's heart. It was about giving that little girl her childhood back. And for Sarah, it was the beginning of a transformation, from a victim of manipulation to a fierce, unrelenting advocate for her daughter. She had found her purpose in the wreckage of her life, to be the shield Lily had always deserved. Chapter 4: The System's Deaf Ear. While Sarah and Lily were finding solace and strength in each other, Miller was hitting a wall of concrete and red tape, built by the very system he served. He ran Mark's full name, Mark Renshaw, through every database he could access. The first hits were minor, a couple of old disorderly conduct charges from a decade ago, nothing that would raise a major flag. He dug deeper, his gut telling him there was more. The man who had hidden under a child's bed and used a police scanner was not a petty criminal. He was something else. He called a contact in the Central Records Department, a grizzled old sergeant named Henderson who owed him a favor. Henderson, it's Miller. I need everything you've got on a Mark Renshaw.
RNSHAW.
There's something not right about this guy. Miller, you and your gut, Henderson grumbled over the phone. I'm buried in paperwork from that downtown bust. What's the priority? The priority is a 7-year-old girl who walked 6 blocks to tell me a monster was living under her bed, Miller said, his voice low and intense. And she was right. Just run the name Henderson. An hour later, Henderson called back, his voice different. The grumbling was gone, replaced by a grim seriousness. You were right, Miller. Your guy Renshaw. He's got a flag. From out of state. Colorado. A person of interest warrant in connection with a string of missing child reports. The cases went cold about 2 years ago. The suspect dropped off the face of the earth. Looks like he landed on Maple Street. Miller's blood ran cold. It wasn't just Lily. There were others. Why wasn't this a national alert? Why wasn't this guy on every news channel? Bureaucracy, my friend, Henderson sighed. The cases were circumstantial. No bodies, no definitive DNA. He was just a person of interest, not an official suspect. The warrant was for questioning. It got buried in a pile of other low-priority interstate requests. The system. It's broken, Miller. It's too big. Things fall through the cracks. And children fell with them. The frustration was a bitter pill. A wanted fugitive, a potential child predator, had been living freely, charming his way into a family's life, all because of paperwork and jurisdictional apathy. The system designed to protect had failed. It had been deaf to the cries of other children, in another state, years ago. Armed with this new information, Miller went to his captain. He laid it all out. Lily's testimony, the scanner, the out-of-state warrant. He expected swift, decisive action. Instead, he got caution. "This is sensitive, Dave," Captain Bryant said, steepling his fingers on his large oak desk. Bryant was a man who saw the world in terms of liability and public relations. "We have him in custody on a local complaint. The Colorado warrant is just for questioning. We can't hold him forever on that. We need more. We need physical evidence tying him to Lily, or to those other cases." "The girl's testimony isn't enough?" Miller asked, incredulous. "A smart lawyer will tear a 7-year-old's testimony apart," Bryant said, his voice flat. "He'll call her imaginative, confused. He'll say you coerced her. You know the drill. We need something solid. Something a jury can see and touch." Miller walked out of the captain's office feeling like he had been punched in the gut. The system wasn't just broken. It was cowardly. It was more concerned with protecting itself from lawsuits than with protecting children. It demanded an impossible burden of proof from its smallest, most vulnerable victims. He knew he couldn't do this alone. The system was against him. He needed more than just police procedure. He needed a community. He needed to build a support network around Lily and Sarah. A network the system couldn't ignore. His first stop was back at Maple Street. He found Mrs. Gable tending her rose bushes, her movements slow but precise. He told her what they had learned about Mark Renshaw. The wise old woman wasn't surprised. She just nodded, her lips a thin, grim line. "I knew it," she said, snipping a dead bloom from a bush. "The devil is always handsome. People like that, they prey on kindness. They look for lonely people." She looked at Sarah's house, her expression full of sorrow. Poor Sarah. She just wanted a partner. She wanted a father for her little girl. She wanted to believe in him. "Mrs. Gable," Miller said, "you mentioned you saw him watching the schoolyard. Did you ever see anything else? Anything specific?" She paused, her gaze turning inward as she sifted through her memories. "He was always out when the school bus came," she said slowly. "The bus driver. A friendly fellow, new this year. Mark would always be there to meet Lily, but he'd talk to the other kids too. Give them candy. Little toys. Their parents thought he was just being a nice neighbor." A new chill went down Miller's spine. The pattern. It was always about a pattern. He wasn't just hiding in that house. He was hunting. Miller's next thought was to find someone else who might have seen something. Another person who might not have realized the significance of what they saw. He thought about who else would have a regular, professional view of the neighborhood children. The school bus driver. He was new, Mrs. Gable had said. He checked the school district's transportation logs. The driver for Lily's route was a man named George Franklin, a semi-retired grandfather who took the job to stay busy. He found George at the bus depot, cleaning out his bus. George was shocked to hear about Mark. "That fellow? Renshaw? He seemed like such a nice guy. Always a friendly word. Always asking after my grandkids. He told me he was a retired teacher." The lie was perfect, designed to disarm and build trust. "George, did you ever notice him paying special attention to any of the other kids?" Miller asked. George thought for a moment, wiping his hands on a rag. "Well, there was the new family, the Patels, at the end of the block. Their little boy, Samir, is very shy. Mark gave him a little toy car one day. Said he had an extra. The boy's mother was so grateful. She said it was the first time Samir had really opened up to a stranger. A toy car." The detail snagged in Miller's mind, sharp and ugly. He then reached out to a retired child psychologist he knew, a woman named Dr. Anya Sharma, whose opinion he trusted more than any manual. He laid out the case for her over the phone, reading Lily's testimony verbatim. "David, this is classic grooming behavior," Dr. Sharma said, her voice tight with clinical concern. "The secret games, the threats disguised as protection, the manipulation of the parent-child bond. This man is a sophisticated and experienced predator. He knows exactly what he's doing. And the fact that he was operating out of a stable home environment, with a trusting partner as his cover. It's the perfect camouflage. You need to look for trophies. Men like this, they're narcissists. They often keep mementos from their victims. It's part of their ritual. Trophies. Mementos. A toy car." The pieces were coming together, forming a picture more monstrous than Miller had dared to imagine. Mark Renshaw wasn't just a fugitive hiding from his past. He had been actively creating a new hunting ground, using Sarah's love and Lily's silence as his shield. The system had failed to find him. His charm had blinded the neighbors. But he had made one mistake. He had underestimated the courage of a 7-year-old girl. Miller realized he was no longer just an officer investigating a crime. He was the anchor of a new impromptu community. A wise neighbor, a concerned bus driver, a retired psychologist, and at the center of it all, a mother and daughter who were finding their strength. They were the ones who would have to fight back because the system had proven it wouldn't or couldn't fight for them. He had to find the proof Bryant demanded. He had to find the trophies. Chapter 5: The Box of Secrets. The decision was made out of a desperate, practical need. Sarah couldn't stay at 412 Maple Street. The house was no longer a home. It was a crime scene tainted by lies and fear. Every corner held a memory that was now poisoned. She had to get herself and Lily out, find a new place. A place where the floors didn't creak with the ghosts of a monster. Miller had arranged for them to stay in a protected temporary apartment, a sterile, anonymous place that felt like a fortress. With Miller and Chan as a protective escort, Sarah returned to the house to pack their most essential belongings. Lily stayed in the car with another officer, unable to even look at the blue bungalow that had once been her world. She just held Barnaby and stared straight ahead. The house was silent now, the cozy atmosphere replaced by a tomb-like stillness. Sarah moved through the rooms like a ghost, grabbing clothes, photo albums, Lily's favorite books. Her movements were jerky, automatic. Her mind was a whirlwind of what-ifs and if-onlys. If only she had listened to that small, nagging doubt in the back of her mind. If only she had questioned why Mark never had any old friends call, why his family was always out of the country. The signs had been there, small red flags she had explained away because she had been so desperate for the dream he was selling. She saved his room for last. Mark's, no, Renshaw's room. She just wanted to get Lily's things and go. But as she was pulling a suitcase from the top shelf of the closet they had shared, her hand brushed against another box. It was a simple, unadorned shoebox tucked away in the back corner, behind a stack of old sweaters. It was light. She almost ignored it. But something made her pause. A sudden cold curiosity. She pulled the box down, dust motes dancing in the sliver of light from the hallway. She hesitated for a moment, her heart pounding. Then with a deep breath she lifted the lid. It wasn't what she expected. There were no weapons, no stacks of cash, no damning documents. At first glance it looked like a collection of random worthless junk, a child's treasure box. But as she looked closer, a wave of nausea washed over her. She knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone what she was looking at. Inside, nestled on a bed of cotton wool, were the trophies. There was a single brightly colored hair barrette, shaped like a butterfly, a small, slightly dirty sock with a cartoon dinosaur on it, a cheap plastic ring with a green stone, the kind you get from a gumball machine. And there at the bottom of the box was a small red die-cast toy car. The toy car. The one the bus driver George had mentioned. The one Renshaw had given to the shy little boy, Samir Patel. Sarah's breath hitched in her throat. Each object was a silent scream, a memory of a child's trust, violated and stolen. This wasn't just a box of trinkets. This was a ledger of his crimes. A collection of souls. Miller's words echoed in her mind. We need something solid. Something a jury can see and touch. She was holding it in her hands. With trembling fingers, she pulled out her phone and called Miller. Her voice was a choked whisper. "I found something," she said. "In his closet. A box. You need to see this. You need to come back here right now." Miller and Chun were back at the house in less than 10 minutes. Sarah was sitting on the edge of the bed, the open shoebox on the floor in front of her as if it were a venomous snake. She couldn't touch it again. Miller knelt down and looked inside. His face, already grim, became a mask of stone. He had seen the worst of humanity in his career, but this was different. This was the cold, calculated collection of a predator. Dr. Sharma had been right. He was a narcissist, a collector. And his collection was about to become his damnation. "Sarah, you did it," Miller said, his voice thick with a mixture of awe and revulsion. "This is it. This is the physical evidence we needed. This is what will put him away for a very, very long time." He carefully closed the lid of the box, treating it with the reverence one would afford a holy relic or an unexploded bomb. This was the turning point. This was the weapon they would use to tear down the walls of the system's indifference. Just then, a call came through on Miller's radio. It was Henderson from Records. "Miller, I've got something else for you. That Colorado PD contact finally got back to me. They've been doing some digging on their old cold cases since you called. One of the missing girls. A 6-year-old named Chloe. Her mother remembered something the investigators at the time thought was irrelevant. The day she disappeared, Chloe had lost her favorite beret, a butterfly-shaped one her grandmother had given her. She was heartbroken about it." Miller looked down at the shoebox in his hands. He didn't need to open it to know what was inside. A brightly colored hair beret, shaped like a butterfly. The connection was made. The pattern was complete. It stretched across states, across years, a trail of broken hearts and stolen innocence, and it all led back to this small, quiet house on Maple Street. But the fight wasn't over. Renshaw was in custody, but he was still projecting an aura of wronged innocence. When his lawyer was informed of the discovery of the box, Renshaw's strategy shifted. He claimed it was just a box of sentimental items, gifts from his girlfriend's daughter Lily. He was going to try and twist this too. He was going to try and defile the one thing he hadn't yet touched: Lily's name. They brought him into the interrogation room one more time. Miller sat across from him, the shoebox on the table between them. Renshaw looked at it, his expression a careful blank. His lawyer sat beside him, smug and confident. "My client has already explained," the lawyer said smoothly. "These are just innocent trinkets from the child. Gifts. He kept them because he cares for her deeply." Miller leaned forward, his eyes locking with Renshaw's. He saw the cold, calculating mind working behind the predator's gaze. "Is that right, Mark?" Miller said, using the name with contempt. "You care about her? Then maybe you can explain this." He opened the box and took out the butterfly beret. This belonged to a little girl named Chloe, from a town outside Denver. She disappeared 2 years ago. Her favorite beret. He then took out the dinosaur sock. "And this. We're still working on this one. But I have a feeling we'll find another missing child who loved dinosaurs." He saved the toy car for last. "And this. This you gave to little Samir Patel right down the street. A gift, right? A friendly gesture from a nice neighbor. Or was it a down payment? Was he next on your list?" For the first time, the mask of composure on Mark Renshaw's face shattered completely. A flicker of raw, animal panic flashed in his eyes. The charm was gone, the lies were gone. All that was left was the cold, cowardly predator, exposed in the harsh fluorescent light of the interrogation room. He lunged forward, not at Miller but at the box. "That's mine," he snarled, his voice a guttural rasp. It was an involuntary, possessive cry. In that single moment he confessed to everything. He wasn't protecting his innocence. He was protecting his trophies. Chan and another officer were on him in an instant, pinning him back in his chair. The lawyer just sat there, his smug expression gone, replaced by a look of stunned disbelief. He had been played too. Miller stood up, his gaze never leaving Renshaw's. "It's over," he said, the words falling like stones into a deep well. "The quiet game is over." As they led Renshaw away, no longer a charming boyfriend but a shackled monster, Miller felt a profound sense of relief, but no joy. The discovery of the box was a victory, but it was a victory measured in the currency of unimaginable pain. Each trinket represented a life altered, a family destroyed. But now, thanks to Sarah's courage and a child's unwavering voice, there was a chance for justice. The unmasking was complete. Now it was time for the world to see the monster for what he truly was. Chapter 6: The Roar of the Community. The arrest of Mark Renshaw and the discovery of the Box of Horrors sent a shockwave through the tranquil community of Maple Street and beyond. The story was explosive. A fugitive child predator, living a quiet suburban life, exposed by the 7-year-old girl he was tormenting. It was the lead story on every local news channel, the headline on the front page of every paper. The initial reaction was one of stunned disbelief. The neighbors who had shared a friendly wave with Mark, who had accepted his help carrying in groceries, who had admired his devotion to Sarah and Lily, they couldn't reconcile the man they thought they knew with the monster on their television screens. How could they have missed it? How could this darkness have been living right next door? But the disbelief quickly curdled into something else: outrage. An outrage directed not just at Renshaw, but at the system that had allowed him to disappear. The news reports detailed the dropped ball, the low-priority warrant from Colorado, the bureaucratic cracks he had slipped through. The community's sense of security was shattered, replaced by a cold, terrifying realization that the safety nets they believed in were full of holes. This outrage, however, did not fester into fear. It galvanized into action. The community, awakened from its sleepy complacency, began to rally. They refused to be passive victims of a systemic failure. They decided to become a network of protectors. It started small. A phone call from the mother of Samir Patel to Sarah, her voice thick with tears and gratitude. "He was so kind to my son," she wept. "I thought he was just a nice man. Thank you. Your daughter. She saved my son. She saved all our children." Then another call and another. Parents from the neighborhood, from the school, from the bus route. They all had a story, a small, seemingly insignificant interaction with Renshaw that now seemed sinister in hindsight. The candy he offered, the overly personal questions he asked about their children, the way he always seemed to be watching. Mrs. Gable became the unofficial hub of this new network. Her front porch, once a quiet spot for watching the world go by, became a command center. Neighbors gathered, sharing information, comparing stories, their collective guilt and fear transforming into a powerful, shared resolve. "Never again," became their mantra. Not on our street. Not in our town. The public forum for this collective roar came in the form of a packed school board meeting. What was scheduled to be a mundane discussion about budget allocations was hijacked by a crowd of angry, determined parents. The first to speak was Sarah. She stood at the podium not as a victim but as a warrior. Lily was not with her. She was safe with Mrs. Gable. This was her mother's fight now. Sarah's voice, once timid, rang through the auditorium clear and strong. "My daughter's voice was almost stolen from her," she began, her eyes sweeping across the faces of the board members and the superintendent. "A man we trusted, a man this community welcomed, tried to silence her. But her voice was stronger than his evil. She spoke up. She saved herself. And in doing so, she exposed a system that is dangerously broken." She detailed the ease with which Renshaw had operated, the trust he had exploited. "We teach our children about stranger danger," she said, her voice rising with passion. "But what do we teach them when the monster is not a stranger? What do we teach them when the monster is the man your mother loves, the friendly neighbor, the nice man on the street? We need to do better. We need to teach our children that their feelings are valid, that their yucky feelings are a warning sign. We need to teach them that their voice matters, and we need to promise them that when they speak, we will listen." A wave of applause, loud and sustained, swept through the auditorium. She had given voice to the fear and anger of every parent in the room. One by one, other parents came to the microphone. The bus driver, George Franklin, spoke, his voice trembling with shame and anger. "I saw him every day. I thought he was a friend. I failed to see what was right in front of me. We all did. We need better protocols. We need better communication between the schools, the parents, the police." The mother of Samir Patel spoke, Her words a quiet testament to the terror that had almost befallen her family. The community reaction was overwhelming. They demanded change. They demanded accountability. The climax of the public resolution came during Renshaw's preliminary hearing. The courtroom was packed. Miller sat with Sarah, a quiet pillar of support. When Mark Renshaw was led into the courtroom in shackles, his transformation was complete. The handsome charm was gone, replaced by a sullen, pathetic emptiness. He refused to look at Sarah. He couldn't face the woman whose trust he had so completely betrayed. The prosecutor laid out the case with devastating precision. He presented the shoebox, itemizing each trophy of pain. He read from Lily's testimony. He detailed the connection to the cold cases in Colorado. The evidence was irrefutable. The verdict, when it came, was swift and definitive. Renshaw was held without bail, charged with a litany of crimes that would ensure he would never see the outside of a prison cell again. A collective sigh of relief washed through the courtroom. But the most important verdict was delivered outside the courthouse on the steps in front of the television cameras. The chief of police stood before the microphones, Captain Bryant at his side looking humbled. The chief publicly acknowledged the systemic failures and announced the formation of a new multi-agency task force dedicated to crimes against children, a task force to be headed by the newly promoted Lieutenant David Miller. Then he looked directly into the camera. This monster was brought to justice not by a complex investigation or a lucky break, he said, his voice ringing with conviction. He was brought to justice by the courage of one 7-year-old girl. She faced down her fears and spoke the truth. She is the true hero of this story. She reminded us all of our most sacred duty, to listen to our children. To that end, our department, in conjunction with the school district, is implementing a new initiative for child safety awareness. We're calling it the Lily Protocol. Lily, watching the news from the safety of Mrs. Gable's living room, heard her name. She saw her mother's proud, tearful face on the screen. She saw Lieutenant Miller nodding, his expression one of quiet satisfaction. She had been heard. Her voice, her small, brave voice, had been validated. It had not just saved herself. It had started a movement. The community was healed, awakened, and forever changed, all because one little girl refused to play the quiet game any longer. Part G. The epilogue: The house that love rebuilt. 1 year later. The autumn sun slanted through the large picture window of a new apartment, illuminating dust motes dancing in the golden light. The apartment was on the 3rd floor of a cheerful brick building overlooking a park filled with the sound of children's laughter. It was a sound that no longer made Sarah's heart clench with fear, but instead filled it with a quiet, profound joy. Their new home was smaller than the house on Maple Street, but it felt infinitely larger. It was filled not with carefully curated furniture designed to impress a new boyfriend, but with their own mismatched, comfortable things. The walls were covered in Lily's vibrant, joyful paintings. There were no closed doors, no secret spaces, no places for monsters to hide. It was a house built not on lies, but on a foundation of hard-won love and resilience. Lily, now a confident 8-year-old, sat at the small kitchen table, carefully drawing. She was no longer the pale, terrified child who had walked into a police station a year ago. Her cheeks were rosy, her dark eyes bright and quick to smile. The shadow was gone. In its place was the radiant light of a child who knows she is safe, who knows she is loved, who knows she is powerful. Barnaby the teddy bear still sat on her bed, but he was no longer a life raft. He was just a beloved old friend. The change in Sarah was just as profound. The guilt that had once threatened to consume her had been transformed, through therapy and tireless action, into a fierce advocacy. She ran a local support group for parents who had experienced similar traumas, her own story a beacon of hope for others navigating their way out of the darkness. She had found her purpose not in being a partner to a man, but in being a warrior for her child and for all children. Her fierce advocacy had become her identity. Their family unit, once broken, had been rebuilt, stronger and more beautiful than before. And it had expanded. Tonight was Friday, which meant it was pizza night. The doorbell rang, and Lily scrambled to answer it, her pigtails flying. "Uncle Dave," she squealed, launching herself into the arms of Lieutenant David Miller. Miller, his uniform crisp, his face relaxed and happy, swung her up into the air. The jaded, weary officer was gone, replaced by a man who had rediscovered his purpose. Heading the new task force, the Lilly Protocol, had become the most meaningful work of his life. They had already successfully intervened in a dozen high-risk cases. Their new approach centered on listening, believing, and acting swiftly. He wasn't just a cop anymore. He was Uncle Dave. He set Lilly down and handed a large pizza box to Sarah, his smile warm and genuine. "I brought pepperoni," he said. A few minutes later, the doorbell rang again. It was Mrs. Gable, leaning on her cane, a Tupperware container in her hands. "I brought my famous brownies," she announced. A growing girl needs her chocolate. After the trial, when Sarah and Lilly had to move, Mrs. Gable had sold her house on Maple Street and moved into a senior living facility just 2 blocks away from their new apartment. She had become the grandmother Lilly had never had, a permanent and cherished part of their new, chosen family. They gathered around the small table, a motley crew bound by a shared history of trauma and triumph. A mother, a daughter, a cop, and a wise elder. They were a family forged in fire, their bonds stronger than blood. They talked and laughed, the easy, comfortable chatter of people who had saved each other. The community had been irrevocably changed for the better. The Lilly Protocol was a resounding success, a model being studied by other districts across the state. Neighborhood watch groups, once focused on burglaries, were now trained to spot the subtle signs of child endangerment. The communication between parents and schools was open and constant. The lesson had been learned in the hardest way possible, but it had been learned. The entire community had become a network of protectors. Mark Renshaw was a distant memory, a ghost locked away in a maximum security prison, his name a footnote in a story that was no longer about him. It was about the people he had failed to break. The Colorado authorities, using the evidence from the shoebox, had been able to definitively link him to 2 other cases, bringing a painful but necessary closure to 2 other families. His reign of terror was over. Later that evening, after the pizza was gone and the brownie container was empty, Miller and Mrs. Gable were getting ready to leave. Lilly hugged Miller tightly. "Thank you for getting the monster, Uncle Dave," she whispered into his jacket. Miller's throat tightened. He knelt down so he was looking directly into her eyes. "No, Lilly," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you. You saved me too. You reminded me why I became a police officer in the first place." He paused, then said the words that had become the cornerstone of their new world. "Your voice matters." "I know," she said with a simple, confident smile. After they had gone, Sarah tucked Lilly into bed. She sat on the edge, stroking her daughter's hair. The room was bathed in the soft glow of a star-shaped nightlight. There were no dark corners here. "Mommy," Lilly said, her voice sleepy, "we saved each other, didn't we?" Tears welled in Sarah's eyes, but they were tears of gratitude, not sorrow. "Yes, my love," she whispered, kissing her daughter's forehead. "Yes, we did. We absolutely did." She watched her daughter drift off to sleep, her face peaceful and serene. The journey had been a nightmare, but they had walked through it and come out into the sun. They had faced the monster and won. They had turned their pain into power, their fear into advocacy, their broken house into a home filled with a love that was unbreakable. One small voice, whispering a terrifying truth in a place of power, had done more than expose a single criminal. It had awakened a mother, reawakened a jaded cop, and roused an entire community from its slumber. It proved that the greatest strength is not found in silence and submission, but in the courageous act of speaking up. For in the end it is the truth, especially the truth spoken by a child, that holds the most incredible power to change the world.